This recognized for any questions he may have for the panel.
Thank the chairman. Mr. Klein, this bill is named after Laken Riley, correct?
Correct.
Who tragically was killed about, 11 days ago?
Correct.
Student at Augusta University, right, I think, who was going for a jog 11 days ago. Now she's no longer here. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
She was killed by somebody who was released into the United States under mass parole under the Biden policies through El Paso. Is that what you understand?
That's my understanding.
Current law requires parole to be on a case-by-case basis. Is that what you understand?
That's what the law says.
And yet this administration is using parole to mass release people into the United States, resulting in the death of an American citizen, at least this one, Laken Riley, in Georgia. Is that what you understand?
This is the most recent one, yes.
Could this bill also have been named, for example, after any number of other individuals, particularly, for example, the 2-year-old who was killed here in Montgomery County, Maryland, who was also killed by somebody who was released on mass parole from an individual from Venezuela?
It could have.
Or perhaps the individual who was raped in Louisiana, a minor who was raped in Louisiana by somebody who was released, a Honduran?
Yes, sir.
Or perhaps we could go back in time. How about Kayla Hamilton, a 20-year-old with autism in Aberdeen, Maryland, with her boyfriend, a 17-year-old illegal alien from El Salvador who appeared at the border in March 2022, an unaccompanied alien minor, and was released into the country to a sponsor. The suspect lived near Kayla, where he would later rape her and beat her to death in her home in July of 2022, less than 2 years ago. A young woman with autism. Authorities later found out that the assailant was a documented MS-13 gang member from El Salvador who was arrested in 2020 for associating with the gang. Does that seem to be a situation in which our border is secure? Is that somebody that maybe perhaps should not have been released into the United States?
Tragically, that's correct.
How about Aiden Clark in Ohio, a 10-year-old boy, 35-year-old illegal alien from Haiti who was released into the country, common theme here, in August of 2022, was struck when he struck a school bus full of children, resulting in the bus flipping and ejecting Aiden, killing him. It's a 10-year-old boy. Another result of the policies of this administration and their open border policies, but more importantly, their release policies of releasing individuals into the United States with spurious understanding of our ability to know whether they've committed crimes, and when we do, still releasing them often. Would the gentleman agree?
I would agree.
Or how about Elizabeth Medina, who was murdered by someone released under the Obama administration? A victim on December 5th, 2023. Elizabeth Medina, a 16-year-old high school student who was a part of the cheerleading team, was found dead in her bathtub in Edna, Texas, by her mother. Her mother found her 16-year-old daughter dead in a bathtub in their home. She was supposed to perform in a local Christmas parade with her cheer squad, but never showed up where her mother went looking for her. Can you imagine?
No, I can't.
The suspect, Rafael Romero, was charged with Elizabeth's murder, a 23-year-old illegal alien who was overstaying his visa for the past 5 years. Another person in the United States unlawfully, because of this administration's and the previous Democratic administration's failures to enforce the law. I could keep going. Example after example of individuals. 10-year-old boy killed in a hit-and-run incident in Midland, Texas, caused by an illegal alien that had been deported 5 separate times. I don't want to hear any more about Cato studies. I don't want to hear any more about, who commits more crimes or less crime, fewer crimes. What I want to hear about is whether someone is supposed to be in this country in the first place, and whether those individuals, when they're in this country, released into this country, particularly knowing that they've been committing crimes or affiliated with gangs or affiliated with dangerous criminal organizations, are released in the United States and then conduct crimes that kill Americans. Does the gentleman from Virginia agree?
I do agree, Mr. Chairman.
With respect to the Senate bill that we've heard so much about, Is the gentleman from Virginia under the perception that the gentleman from Texas, myself, is somehow beholden to the former president of the United States, President Trump?
No.
Is there any indication in the news that he is beholden to the former president of the United States?
No, Mr. Chairman.
The reason I point that out is the bill that the former president opposed in the Senate is a bill worthy of opposition because the bill would not have done the job. And the former president is correct. And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and I assume the gentleman from Virginia would agree, but it's important for the record to reflect that that bill would not have accomplished the job, and in fact would have made it worse. And that is why it was opposed before it even came to the House. People want to say, well, somehow House conservatives who killed that bill. Well, I wish I had that magic wand because there's a lot of bills I'd like to kill by just blinking at it. But this bill was killed in the Senate. I'm not even sure, remember what the vote was? It wasn't very close. The bill died in the Senate. Now, why might it have died in the Senate? Here's the question I would have. Would this bill have fixed? Let's just focus on the issue of parole. Let's just focus on parole, not the rest of the bill, not the utter nonsense about this bill would have done something in terms of increased funding that we know would have been used to process more people or somehow would have dealt with fentanyl. The fact is parole. This bill would not have fixed parole, the Senate bill, because as I understand that bill, it would have simply continued to allow parole to be awarded en masse to people through ports of entry and included mass exceptions to what you could do to even that rule. In other words, it wouldn't have touched parole. So the very mechanism that has been used to parole these individuals, the very mechanism used to parole the man who came into this country, was released, went to New York, engaged in some behavior or is engaging with police there, then left and went to Georgia, killed Laken Riley. It was under parole that the Senate bill would not have fixed. Is that the gentleman's understanding?
It's my understanding that the bill would have codified the misuse of parole authority that's currently the policy of this administration.
It is also the gentleman's understanding that it would have provided attorneys for people who are here illegally? Is it also the gentleman's understanding that that legislation would have codified mass releases in the form of what we casually refer to alternatives to detention?
That's my understanding.
Because what I think the average American probably is under the misunderstanding, if they listen to the words uttered by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, that somehow the Senate bill would have had this magic ability to fix the glitch that magically just started going on steroids somehow in January of 2021, just totally coincidentally, that we would have had with respect to the entirety of all of the releases into this country, right? We know that asylum wouldn't have been fixed under the Senate bill. We know that parole wouldn't have been fixed under the Senate bill. We know that lawyers would have been provided. NGOs would have received upwards of, I don't know, $1.4 billion, $2 billion, $2.5 billion, something like that dollars for NGOs to continue to process people. $4 billion for allegedly for asylum officers to process claims with a requirement they be processed in 180 days, which we know would have been a rubber stamp for asylum claims, when in fact the average American believes, as I started to say a minute ago, that people are detained. That if someone comes to this country, as the law says, you are to be detained. That a claim is then processed by somebody for a legitimate claim of persecution for your religious or political beliefs. It is detained, it is then determined, and then you are either returned home or allowed to be in the United States temporarily while we sort out your claim. Is that what the gentleman understands is what the current law should be and what most average Americans think it is? But the truth is, under the Biden administration, people are being released en masse into the United States under parole and asylum and other avenues.
That's my understanding.
So now we have the legislation before us, named after Laken, that would do two things. One, the second part, which has gone before committee, is a part that would give standing to states to be able to go into court and to say, hey, we have a situation where law's not being enforced and we're being harmed by it. Well, let me ask you a question. If you're the parent of Laken Riley, do you think there's a harm?
Absolutely.
If you're the attorney general or the governor of the state of Georgia, do you think there's been a harm to one of the citizens that you represent?
Absolutely.
And do you think in the absence of enforcement of the law by the federal government that it should be incumbent upon the governor and the attorney general of that state in Georgia to be able to go into court to say that the laws of the books, the federal laws, should be enforced?
Yes, sir.
The other provision is a provision to require that when there are certain crimes, I don't have the list in front of me, theft, burglary, and other crimes, that those crimes that are currently largely being ignored or not reported, or if they're reported, there's not a detainer attached to it, this would require that a detainer be attached, correct?
Correct.
Now, again, for the complaint that I've heard about, well, it might just be an arrest, that's un-American, we're talking about people here who came to the United States and were released into the United States under color of a claim to asylum or under some expansive use of parole, released into the United States, i.e. you're a guest. You are a guest under the benefit of the privileges of being here in this country. And you get arrested. You get arrested. Now, there's due process under our Constitution for someone who's here, who's a non-American citizen. Due process in terms of the arrest and the crime. Do you have a right to not have a detainer placed on you when you came into the United States and you're seeking asylum or seeking a benefit when you come to the United States?
No.
You do not. All we're trying to do in this legislation, it ain't rocket science. It ain't a 1,000-page bill filled with, I don't know, $12.7 billion of earmarks. Sorry, I think I just slipped into another bill in another category of debate. It is a short bill designed to try to help the American people, try to give some sort of semblance of order to our country when the American people have had it, and had it with a Congress that refuses to do its job to check an executive which is lawless and out of control, and that Americans are dying as a result of it, namely Ms. Riley from Georgia. I yield back.